The dead star outside Velmara Station gave off no light, only a slow pull that made every ship dock at a careful angle. Inside the great hall, lamps shaped like floating petals drifted above the council table. They glowed soft blue and threw long shadows across delegates from 12 worlds. The air smelled of burned sugar, a perfume the Concorde used for important sessions. None of the smells, lights, or careful designs could hide the truth of the room. Power lived here, and power had no patience for warnings. Ambassador Daniel Ward stood at the edge of the chamber, behind a low railing meant for observers. His suit was plain gray. His shoes were old. In his hand, he held a thin folder made of paper, which made several delegates point and whisper. Paper was something only humans still used in formal meetings. To the Concorde, it looked like a child carrying sticks into a room of swords. The Krellin speaker rose first. His crest of bone curled back from his forehead like a crown of polished horns. His voice carried easily across the hall. He welcomed the council, praised the harvest reports from 3 core worlds, and then turned his long eyes toward the observer rail. He said the chamber had agreed to grant a single human 5 minutes of speaking time. He smiled in the Krellin way, which showed 3 rows of small teeth. Ward stepped forward. He did not bow. He did not flatter. He set the folder on the speaker's table and opened it. His words were simple. There was a swarm moving through the outer dark. Earth's telescopes had tracked it for 12 years. It did not behave like ships. It did not behave like animals. It folded through space in shapes that should not be possible, and every world it touched went silent within hours. He named the silent worlds, 4 of them, all small mining outposts on the far rim. He said the swarm would reach the inner systems within 90 days if the council did nothing. He asked for joint action, survey ships, sensor sharing, a small fleet to study the threat at close range. The chamber sat still for one long breath. Then the Krellin speaker laughed. It was a soft laugh at first, more like a cough, but other delegates joined in. The Hessian ambassador slapped his thigh. The thin gray envoys from Olu shook their narrow heads. The laughter grew until the petal lamps trembled. Dirt eaters, the Krellin speaker said, wiping moisture from his eye ridge. You measure time in heartbeats. You build ships from scrap and call them fleets. And now you bring us a folder of paper and ask us to be afraid. A delegate from the Burin cluster stood. She was tall, with skin like cracked stone. She told the chamber that the rim worlds Ward had named were poor, unimportant places. Mining outposts often went silent for months. Equipment failed. Workers wandered off. There was no swarm. There was only a small species seeking attention. Another voice agreed. Then another. Soon the chamber was a wall of polite mockery. Ward did not raise his voice. He did not interrupt. He waited until the laughter slowed on its own, the way a person waits for rain to pass. When the room was quiet again, he picked up his folder. He closed it gently. He thanked the Concorde for their time. That was all. He walked back through the long hall, past the floating lamps, past rows of delegates who had already turned to their next agenda item. A young Krellin aide near the door whispered something to a friend, and they both laughed again. Ward heard it. His face did not change. Outside the chamber, the corridor was cooler. 2 human guards in plain uniforms fell in behind him. They walked in silence to the docking ring. The shuttle waited there, small and unmarked, its hull scratched from years of long travel. Ward climbed in and sat by the narrow window. The shuttle pushed off from the station and turned its nose toward open space. Velmara grew small behind them, a ring of soft lights around a hole in the universe. The pilot, a quiet woman named Wren, did not ask how the meeting had gone. She had served Ward for 9 years. She already knew. He took out a small device from his coat pocket. It was older than most of the equipment on the station they had just left, a private comm tuned to 1 channel only. He pressed his thumb to the screen and waited for the secure handshake. When the connection opened, he did not waste words. They will not listen, he said. Begin phase 2. He cut the line before any reply could come. For a long while he watched the dark outside the window. The dead star fell away behind them. Somewhere ahead, beyond the safe lanes of the Concorde, a swarm was already eating its way through the rim. He had counted the days carefully. 87 left, maybe less. Wren glanced back at him once. She saw the folder in his lap and the steady set of his jaw. She turned forward again. The shuttle slipped into the long jump corridor toward Earth. Behind it, on Velmara Station, The petal lamps still glowed. The Concorde moved on to discuss a trade dispute over salt routes. The Krellin speaker told the joke about the human and his folder twice more before the session ended, and each time the chamber laughed. The folder, with all its quiet evidence, was carried by a clerk to a low shelf in the station archive. It was stamped with the seal of dismissed petitions. The clerk put it between two thicker reports and forgot it before he left the room. The countdown had begun, and only one species in the galaxy knew the clock was running. Hadron Moon had no real name on any Concorde map. It was listed as a rock, nothing more, a small body circling a brown dwarf in a system that no one bothered to claim. Even the smugglers avoided it. The gravity was wrong for cargo runs, and the dust storms could strip paint from a hull in 20 minutes. To anyone glancing at a chart, it looked like nothing worth a second look. That was the point. Under the surface of Hadron, 300 meters down, the lights never went off. Dr. Lena Hart walked through the long, curved corridor of the main lab with a cup of cold tea in her hand. She had forgotten she was carrying it. Her boots made soft sounds on the floor plates. Around her, screens flickered in low blue light, and engineers spoke in quiet voices, the way people speak in libraries or hospitals. No one shouted on Hadron. Shouting wasted breath, and breath was filtered air. She stopped at a wide window that looked down into the main assembly chamber. Below her, suspended on slow magnetic rails, hung the object her team had been building for 12 years. It did not look like a weapon. It looked like a sculpture made by someone who loved silence. A long spine of dark metal, ringed by hundreds of small mirrored discs, each one the size of a coin. Cables thinner than hair connected the discs to a central core that pulsed once every 2 seconds, slow as a sleeping heart. A young engineer named Yusuf joined her at the window. He had ink on his thumb and dark circles under his eyes. "Final tuning passed last night," he said quietly. "All channels stable." Hart did not answer right away. She watched the slow pulse of the core. 12 years was a long time to build one thing. 12 years of failed prototypes, of arguments about frequencies, of letters from families who never got real answers about what their loved ones were working on. And now the object hung in front of her, finished, beautiful, and terrible. "Has the message come through?" she asked. Yusuf nodded once. "An hour ago. Phase 2. Hart finally took a sip of her tea and made a face. It was very cold. She set the cup on a ledge and forgot it again. In a smaller room down the hall, 3 biologists sat around a curved table. They were arguing in low voices, the way Hadron people always argued. The lead biologist was a man named Idris, gray-bearded, with hands that shook slightly from too many late nights. On the wall behind him, a display showed 12 years of recordings. The recordings were not video. They were sound. Strange sounds, captured from probes that had drifted, unannounced and unapproved, into regions of space the Concorde refused to study. The sound on the wall was the voice of the hollow drift. It was not a language. It was not even a pattern that any normal mind could hold. It was a hunger that had learned to make noise. Idris had spent a decade listening to it through earpieces, sometimes for 16 hours at a stretch. He had stopped sleeping well a long time ago, but he had also learned something the Concorde had never learned. The drift was not a fleet, and it was not an army. It was a single hungry thing, scattered across the dark, all of it humming on the same secret frequency. You could not fight a hunger with bullets. You could only feed it something it could not swallow. Idris looked up when Hart entered the room. He did not stand. He simply gestured to the chair beside him. "They laughed at him," Hart said, sitting down. "Ward's report came through on the courier shuttle." Idris nodded slowly. "Of course they did." One of the younger biologists, a woman with short braids and steady hands, asked the question no one else wanted to ask. "Are we sure, Doctor? About the calibration?" Idris was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the wall, at the sound of the drift, at 12 years of his life made visible in soft green lines. "We are as sure as we can be," he said. "If we are wrong, the device sings into the dark and nothing happens. If we are right, the drift hears something it cannot stop hearing." The young biologist swallowed. "And if we are wrong, the rim worlds burn." "The rim worlds may burn anyway," Idris said, without cruelty. "That is the truth we live with." Far above them, on the surface of Hadron, a dust storm scraped across the rocks. No one heard it inside the buried halls. Hart left the biology room and walked to her own small office. The walls were lined with notes, drawings, and a single old photograph of her grandfather, who had been a quiet farmer in a quiet country a long time ago. He had once told her that the loudest people in any room were usually the most afraid. She had not understood it as a child. She understood it now. She sat down and opened the secure channel to Earth Command. Her message was short. The device was ready. The team was ready. They could move to the staging point within 72 hours, well inside Ward's 87-day window. She closed the channel and put her face in her hands for a long moment. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for the rim worlds that had already gone dark and for the next worlds that would go dark before the device was in place. Across the galaxy, on a small colony called Tessar Prime, a young communications officer was watching her displays go strange. Her cousins on the night shift had stopped answering messages. The colony's sensor net was showing shapes it did not have names for. She tried to call the Concord patrol station 3 jumps away. The patrol station did not answer. By morning, Tessar Prime would be silent. The Concord would call it a communication error. They would move on to other business. The pedal lamps would still glow. On Hadron, the slow pulse of the device kept counting. A patrol cruiser called the Severin Light was the first ship to see the truth and report it before dying. The captain was a Buran officer named Tola, a quiet woman who had served the Concord fleet for 30 years. She had been sent to the rim because her superiors believed there was nothing there to worry about. The mission orders even joked about it. Check on the silent colonies. Bring back samples of broken radios. Be home in a week. Her ship dropped out of jump near the world of Olen, and the bridge crew went quiet at the same moment. Olen had been a green world. There had been forests, a single ocean, 3 small cities, and roughly 40,000 people working the iron belts in the southern hills. The world had paid its taxes on time. It had a small ceremonial flag and a song the children sang at school. The world was still there, but it was not green anymore. The forests were gone. The ocean was a flat, dark mirror. Across the day side of the planet, long curling shapes moved over the surface like smoke under glass. Except smoke does not have edges, and these shapes had edges. The shapes were eating the land. The bridge sensors tried to count the shapes and could not. The numbers kept changing. The numbers kept rising. Captain Tola did not panic. She had been trained not to panic. She gave 3 orders in a calm voice. Begin full sensor recording. Send a coded burst back to the Concord. Hold position for 90 seconds, no longer. The coded burst went out at the speed of light, racing toward the nearest relay buoy. At second 42, the shapes on Olen noticed the Severin Light. It was hard to say how they noticed. The ship had not fired anything. It had not even moved. But several of the long, curling shapes lifted from the surface and rose into the upper atmosphere, then kept rising, peeling away from the world like ribbons leaving a wound. They came toward the ship faster than any drive in the Concord catalog. Tola did not retreat. She had 90 seconds, and she meant to use them. She kept her sensors running and her recording open. She spoke calmly into the log. She described what she saw. She described how the shapes folded through space without engines. She described the way the light bent near them, as if the dark itself was being chewed. She described the sound that began to come through the ship's audio sensors when the shapes drew close, a low humming that was not a language but felt like one, the way a scream is not a word but means everything. At second 78, the first shape reached the hull. The Severin Light did not explode. Explosions are clean. The ship simply began to come apart, plate by plate, in a way that should not have been possible in vacuum. The shapes did not bite. They folded around the ship, and the ship folded with them. Tola kept her voice steady through it. The recording captured her last words. The Concord must be told. This is not a fleet. This is a hunger. Send the humans. Send the humans now. The coded burst reached the relay buoy 6 hours later. The buoy passed it along the chain. By morning, the message arrived at the inner systems. The Concord chamber was not laughing this time. The pedal lamps were brighter than usual, almost white, because someone had increased the power in panic. Delegates rushed in from 12 worlds. The Krellin speaker arrived without his ceremonial robe. His crest looked dull. He had not slept. The recording from the Severin Light played on the main display. The chamber watched the shapes come for the cruiser. The chamber heard Tola's calm voice. The chamber heard the humming. Several delegates had to leave the room. When the recording ended, the room was silent for a long time. A junior aide ran in with another report. 2 more rim worlds had gone dark in the last 12 hours. The shapes were moving inward. The patrol fleets that had been sent to check were not answering. The Buran ambassador, the same woman who had called Ward's warning attention-seeking, sat with her face in her hands. The Hessian ambassador had gone very still. The Krellin speaker stood up slowly. His voice, when it came, was not the booming voice of 3 months ago. "Send for the human ambassador," he said. Now, there was a pause, because no one in the chamber wanted to be the one to fetch Ward. Eventually a clerk was sent. Ambassador Daniel Ward arrived at the chamber 2 hours later. He wore the same plain gray suit. His shoes were the same old shoes. Under his arm, he carried the same folder. It looked like he had not even gone home since the last meeting. He walked down the long aisle without hurry. The pedal lamps trembled slightly as he passed. Delegates who had laughed at him 3 months ago could not meet his eyes. Some looked at the floor. Some looked at their hands. Ward stopped at the speaker's table. He did not sit. He did not bow. He placed the folder on the table, exactly where he had placed it before, and opened it to the same page. The page showed the swarm. The map showed the path. The dates showed the timeline. Every prediction matched what the chamber had just witnessed in the recording. The Krellin speaker tried to speak. His voice caught in his throat. He tried again. "Ambassador," he said, "the Concord requests immediate assistance from humanity. Ships, weapons, anything you can give." Ward looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at every face in the chamber, one by one. He did not say anything cruel. He did not need to. When he finally spoke, his voice was the same calm voice he had used the first time. "Humanity will help," he said. "But this time, you will listen, and you will agree to our terms." The chamber did not laugh. The freighter was called the Quiet Field. It had been built 60 years ago in a dockyard above Earth's moon, and it had spent most of its life hauling grain between mining colonies. The paint on its hull was faded. Its registration number had been scrubbed and replaced 3 times. To any sensor in the galaxy, it looked exactly like what it pretended to be, a tired old cargo ship limping along a forgotten trade lane. Inside, the Quiet Field was no longer a freighter. The cargo holds had been stripped to bare metal. In place of grain bins, the long spine of the Hadron device hung in a careful frame, surrounded by hundreds of mirrored discs that breathed slow blue light. The hallways were empty. There was no crew. There had not been a crew for 3 weeks. The Quiet Field was steered by a small computer with one job, and the job was to drift. The ship was drifting now, in a region called the Severin Reach. The Reach was a wide patch of nothing between 3 dying stars, the kind of place that swallowed lost things. The drift had been pulled toward it by a careful trail of broken communication signals, leaked over the course of 2 weeks. Earth's intelligence service had set the trail like breadcrumbs in a story. The drift had followed, exactly as predicted. On an observation post 2 jumps away, Dr. Lena Hart stood in a dim room and watched the bait sail toward the trap. The post was a small, armored station, half buried in the ice of a frozen moon. Its sensors were sharper than anything the Concorde had ever built. They were not Concorde sensors. They were human sensors, designed to listen for something the Concorde did not believe in. On the main screen, the Quiet Field showed up as a single slow dot. Around the dot, the screen showed a wide gray fog, and the fog was the drift. Idris stood beside her. He had not shaved in days. His hands, for once, were steady. "They are accepting the signal," he said softly. "All recorded frequencies match. It is one swarm. One hunger." Hart nodded. She did not trust her voice. Her throat felt dry. Behind her, a row of operators worked in silence. One of them was Yusuf, the young engineer who had built the central core. He was watching a single number on his screen. The number was the charge level of the device. It needed to be at full charge when the drift made contact. Not before. Not after. The Concorde watched, too, from a safe distance. 3 Krellin cruisers and a Buran flagship had been allowed, after long argument, to observe the operation. Their captains had been ordered not to interfere. They had also been ordered not to ask questions about what they saw. Both orders came from Ambassador Ward, who was now sitting on the bridge of the Buran flagship with the same folder in his lap. The Krellin captain on the flagship, a young officer named Vel, kept stealing glances at Ward. He could not understand the human's calm. The dot on the display was a ship full of irreplaceable technology, and it was sailing into the largest swarm of monsters the galaxy had ever seen, alone, unarmed. Vel had been raised to believe humans were small, scared creatures. Yet this human watched the screen the way a farmer watches rain. "Ambassador," Vel finally said, "your ship will be destroyed." "Yes," Ward said. "That is the plan." Vel had no answer to that. On the quiet field, the slow drifted closer to the gray fog. The first contact was almost gentle. A single curling shape peeled away from the swarm and brushed against the freighter's hull. The hull began to come apart, the same way the Severin light had come apart at Olan. Plates folded. Metal side. The drift did not bite. It simply ate by being near. Then the swarm noticed there was something inside the ship. The gray fog tightened. Thousands of shapes turned at once and folded toward the bait. The screen on the observation post showed the fog collapse inward like a closing fist. From every angle, the drift came for the device, hungry for whatever new flavor it had sensed. Hart held her breath. "Wait," Idris said quietly. "Wait." The charge number on Yusuf's screen climbed. 92, 95, 98. The drift reached the central core. The hundreds of mirrored discs unfolded, blooming outward like a slow flower made of glass. 100. The device sang. It did not make sound that could be heard with ears. It made sound in the place where the drift lived, in the frequency that had been the drift's secret language for longer than any civilization could remember. 12 years of listening had taught the human team exactly which notes to play. The discs sent the notes out into the dark. The drift heard. It could not stop hearing. On the observation post, the gray fog on the screen began to do something it had never done before. It began to turn on itself. The curling shapes wrapped around each other. The swarm folded inward. The hunger, faced with a song it could not swallow, started to consume its own scattered body, because that was the only thing within reach that still made sense. A small light flared on the screen as the quiet field finally came apart. The freighter died doing its one job, but the song kept playing. The device had been designed to keep singing even after its body was gone, broadcasting from the broken pieces scattered across the reach. The drift writhed. It did not stop writhing. On the Buran flagship, Vel stood up slowly from his command chair. His mouth was open. The Concorde ship sensors, far less sensitive than the human ones, were finally catching the edge of what was happening. The captain whispered something to his sensor officer, who shook her head, unable to give a sane reading. Ward closed his folder and tucked it under his arm. He stood and walked to the viewing window. Outside, the dark was beginning to flicker with strange light. The drift was turning on itself across 3 star systems. On the ice moon, Hart finally let out her breath. Her eyes were wet. She did not wipe them. "They never knew we were listening to them," she said softly. 12 years. They never knew. Idris put a hand on her shoulder. The song continued, alone now, drifting outward through the dark. Long after most Navy charts ended, where the Concorde drew a thick red line and wrote "Do Not Cross," there was a region called the Dead Belt. No one knew why it had earned the name. Some said an old war had ended there. Some said the stars in that region had been born wrong. The truth, hidden in human probe data for over a decade, was simpler and worse. The Dead Belt was where the hollow drift slept between feedings. It was the hunger's home. And now the hunger was running back to it, broken and chasing its own tail. A fleet of 12 human freighters followed at a careful distance. The freighters had no weapons. They had no fighter escorts. From the outside, they looked like the quiet field had looked, tired old ships that should have been scrapped years ago. But each one carried a piece of the Hadron device, tuned to a slightly different note. Together, they would form a chord, and the chord would do to the rest of the drift what the single song had done to the swarm at the Severin Reach. The lead ship was the Long Patience. Its captain was a woman named Sora, 60 years old, with short white hair and a habit of humming while she worked. She had volunteered for this mission the moment it was offered. Her grandson had been a junior engineer on one of the Silent Rim colonies. She did not speak about him often. She did not need to. Behind her freighters, at a respectful distance, came the Concorde observation fleet. The Krellin captain Vel was no longer just watching. After the Severin Reach, he had asked for permission to fly point in the observation line. His superiors had granted it without argument. Vel had seen the song work. The young officer who had once been raised on jokes about dirt eaters now sat very quietly behind his console. watching humans do what no other species had been able to do. Ambassador Daniel Ward was on the long patience. He had insisted on being there. The folder still rested under his arm. The fleet moved in a shape no Concord admiral would have approved. The freighters did not stay in a tight formation. They spread wide, almost lazy, like a slow net being cast across the dark. Each ship took up a position calculated by Idris and his team. From the outside it looked random. From a higher view, it formed a pattern that matched the natural folding paths of the drift itself, the same paths humans had learned by listening in silence for 12 years. Vel, watching the pattern on his display, finally understood. He whispered to his sensor officer, "They are not catching the drift. They are tuning it, like an instrument." The sensor officer did not reply. She was crying quietly into her console. The first chord rang out when the freighters reached the edge of the dead belt. It was not a violent thing. The ships did not flash. There were no beams or bright lights. The mirrored discs on each freighter opened, one by one, and the song began. 12 notes, tuned to 12 points in the drift's secret frequency. Each note was thin on its own. Together they wove into something solid. The drift, scattered across 3 star systems and already turning on itself, heard the chord. The dark caught fire. It was not real fire. The vacuum has no fuel. But the screens on the Concorde ships could not describe what they saw in any other word. Long ribbons of the drift lit up from inside, glowing a color that did not belong to any catalog. The hunger consumed itself faster now, drawn toward each note like moths toward 12 different lamps. Across the dead belt, the stars themselves seemed to shimmer, painted in the strange light of the dying swarm. On the long patience, Sora hummed a soft tune to herself. Her hands rested easily on the controls. Beside her, Ward watched the screen with the same quiet expression he had worn in the Concorde chamber. "How long?" he asked. Sora glanced at the readout. 20 minutes. Maybe less. It took 14. When the last ribbon of the drift folded into itself and went still, the chord faded slowly, the way the last note of a song lingers in a hall after the singer has stopped. The screens cleared. The dead belt was quiet for the first time in a very long age. The hunger that had eaten Olin and Tessar Prime and 4 other worlds was gone. On the rim colonies that had not yet been touched, the shadows on the sky vanished. People came out of cellars and underground shelters where they had hidden. They looked up at the stars and saw normal stars. Children began to cry, and then to laugh, the way children do when they finally understand they are safe. No one on those worlds knew yet what had happened. No one knew the name of the device, or the woman who had built it, or the captain who had hummed to herself while the dark caught fire. They only knew that the burning had stopped. The Concorde chamber learned of it within an hour. This time, when the petal lamps glowed, the room was completely silent. No delegate spoke. No aide whispered. The Krellin speaker sat in his place with his hands folded. He had aged in the last week. His crest had lost some of its polish. Ambassador Daniel Ward returned to the chamber 3 days later. He walked down the long aisle in his plain gray suit. The folder was still under his arm. He set it on the speaker's table, exactly where he had set it twice before, and opened it to the same first page. The Krellin speaker stood. His voice was very quiet. "Ambassador," he said, "how did you know what to build?" Ward looked at the chamber for a long moment. He thought of Idris and his sleepless years. He thought of Hard on the Ice Moon. He thought of Captain Tola of the Severin Light, who had given her last 90 seconds to make sure her warning reached home. He thought of Sora humming on the bridge of the long patience. He spoke in the same calm voice as always. "Because we listened," he said. "While you laughed, we listened." The chamber lowered its eyes. Outside, far beyond the dead star, the real stars burned in their old, quiet way again. A month after the dead belt went quiet, the Concorde called a final session. It was not held on Velmara Station this time. Velmara felt too small, too haunted by the laughter of the first meeting. Instead, the delegates gathered on the council world of Sinner, a green planet of low hills and tall blue grass, where the main hall had been carved into the side of a mountain. The hall was old. It had hosted the founding of the Concorde itself, 6 centuries earlier. Few sessions had ever been deemed important enough to use it. This one was. The seating in the hall was arranged in 3 rings. The inner ring was for the High Council, the most powerful 7 species in known space. The middle ring was for full member worlds. The outer ring, smallest and lowest, was for observers. For all of human history with the Concord, the observer ring was where humanity had sat. When the delegates arrived for the final session, they found the observer ring had been removed. In its place stood a single empty chair, set at the head of the High Council ring itself. The chair was carved from dark wood and bore no symbol. A small plaque beside it had been engraved with two simple words in the Concord trade tongue: reserved for Earth. The Krellin delegation arrived in plain robes. The speaker, who had once worn the most ornate crown in the chamber, had asked his servants to leave his ceremonial crest at home. He took his seat in the middle ring rather than the inner one. It was a public step down. No one in the chamber commented on it. Everyone in the chamber understood. Ambassador Daniel Ward arrived last, on foot, the same way he always arrived. His suit was still plain gray. His shoes were still old. The folder was still under his arm, though its corners were softer now from many months of carrying. The speaker rose first. His voice, once booming and proud, was now careful and slow. He spoke of the rim colonies that had been lost. He named each of them. He read the names of the patrol crews who had died on the Severin Light and on the relief ships that had vanished after it. The chamber listened to every name. No one whispered. No one shifted in their seat. Then he spoke of humanity. He admitted, plainly, that the Concord had failed. He admitted that the warning had been brought to the chamber in time, with full evidence, and the chamber had laughed. He admitted that without the work humans had done in secret for years, without thanks or recognition, the inner systems would now be empty. He named Dr. Lena Hart. He named Idris. He named Captain Sora and Captain Tola. He named Ambassador Ward. He offered humanity the highest seat in the High Council. He said the chair had been carved, the plaque had been engraved, and the vote had already been taken among the other 6 species. It was unanimous. Humanity was to lead. The chamber waited. Ward listened to all of it with the same steady face. When the speaker finished, he walked slowly to the speaker's table. He set the folder down for the last time. He did not open it. He spoke quietly, but the carved walls of the old hall carried his voice to every ring. "Thank you," he said. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the High Council. "But humanity does not want to lead the Concord. We do not want to rule worlds that are not ours. We did not build the device to become kings. We built it because no one else would listen when the warning came." He paused. His eyes moved across the rings, taking in each face, the way he had taken in every face the first time he stood in a chamber like this. "We will accept a seat at the table," he said. "A full seat, equal to any other. Not above, not below. We will speak when there is something to say, and we will listen when others have something to say. That is all we have ever asked for." He picked up the folder one last time. "And the next time a small voice brings a warning to this chamber, we ask only one thing of you. Listen the first time." He set the folder down again, gently, and walked back down the aisle. The chamber sat in silence for a long moment. Then, one by one, the delegates of the High Council stood. They did not clap. The Concord did not clap. Standing was the highest form of respect they had, and they offered it to a man in a plain gray suit who was already halfway out the door. The plaque on the chair was changed later that week. The new words read simply, "Earth, seated." Far away, on the moon called Hadron, Dr. Lena Hart walked through the main assembly chamber for the last time. The long spine of the device was gone. The mirror discs had been removed and melted down. The frames had been taken apart, plate by plate. The walls were bare and clean. Yusuf and Idris walked beside her. They were not sad. They were not happy either. They were tired in a good way, the way a long worker is tired at the end of a long shift. In a small vault beneath the main hall, sealed behind 3 doors and guarded by a quiet lock, the plans were stored. 12 years of work, complete, neat, and put away. On the front of the vault, a single line of human script had been carved into the metal, in case they stopped listening again. Hart pressed her hand to the metal once, briefly, and then turned away. Above Hadron, the stars burned in their old, quiet way. Somewhere in the dead belt, the last echo of the song faded into nothing. The hunger was gone. The void remembered. In the records of 7 civilizations, a new line was written that year, in 7 different languages. "When humans warn you, listen the first time." It became a phrase that children learned in their first lessons, on 100 worlds, for 1,000 years after. No one remembered the exact face of the man who had carried the folder. No one remembered the exact name of the moon where the device had been built. But the lesson stayed. And the next time a small voice rose to warn a great chamber, every delegate in the room leaned forward to listen. That was enough.